άρχισε η οδύσσιά μου. Ο γουλιάδος μου, ο Ερίκος ο Σεβίλιας, ο οποίος ήταν στο Auschwitz πέθανε με τον αριθμό.
Ερίκος Σεβίλιας από την Αθήνα.
Μετά πήγαμε στο ψηφιακό σπίτι.
Many of the Jewish refugees saw Europe as the graveyard of the Jewish people. Wherever they went, they were reminded of the life that had been there before. Some remained in the concentration camps, others fled. Some tried to get to mandatory Palestine, but the doors were closed by British restrictions. The United States as well had difficult immigration policies. Thousands in the end managed to get to South Africa, Australia, and South America. However, because of the excessive red tape, the increasing anti-Semitism, the difficult voyages, there was no other option for many of these people but to congregate in camps that were set up by the Allies after the war. These camps were called displaced persons camps. Conditions in the DP camps, especially at the beginning, were very difficult. Some of the camps were located in former concentration camps. Some of them were even located in former German army barracks, so that many of the survivors were walking around behind barbed wire, still in their concentration camp uniforms. Food and medicine were very scarce. The death rate remained high for weeks. And still, these refugees streamed into the DP camps. For many, it would be the place where they would take their first steps forward. In teaching about these first steps, we need to ask, what are the things we take for granted that represented freedom to the survivors of the Holocaust? A book, a pen, a piece of fruit, a hot shower with soap. These were all basic things that had been taken away from those who had survived, so basic that it's hard for us today to grasp this.
It was important and urgent to give them back their identity. Therefore, we learned their names, and when we managed to say, "Good morning, Menashe, how are you, Mordechai?" they were so surprised. They looked at us and could not believe that someone was calling them by name.
It was not only the physical, material things that needed to be restored. The survivors' faith in humanity, especially that of the children, also had to be restored. Children who had been abused, who had been hidden, who had seen death, had become very, very cynical of the adult world. Their confidence needed to be rebuilt. For instance, we can ask students to look at the poster that they see here and to try and find a deeper meaning beyond the simple act that they see. What is the adult doing besides trying to help the child put on her shoe? What does the child's body language say? Does she feel free to lean on the adult? Once children's faith in humanity was restored, once anyone's faith in humanity was restored, then these people could go ahead and start to try to rehabilitate their lives.
Their thirst for knowledge is amazing. One fact is worthy of mention. Not a single pupil is late for class. They come without breakfast because the canteen is open at 8:30 while school begins at 8. Anyone who is aware of the sensitivity to hunger of the former Katsetniks will appreciate their devotion to studies.
For many survivors, culture and education were very important. We can ask, why were they so important when for many of these people food was still scarce, they were still in mourning, and the future was still very uncertain? For many of them, culture was what represented the bridge between their former lives. It connected them to their previous traditions. It was also a way to escape their reality. Education was the key to their futures. For instance, survivors in the DP camps published more than 70 newspapers. They had film screenings, they established sports clubs, there were theaters, there was art, there was culture. They also established schools to give the children whose lives had been interrupted vocational and educational training. In addition, they began commemoration projects. The camps were full of posters everywhere to make people aware of all these activities. The atmosphere was the opposite of the desperation and the awful uncertainty that the survivors of the Holocaust had been living with. As a matter of fact, the atmosphere was one of a frenzy of activity, as though these people were trying to make up for all the time they had lost. Survivors who were alone tried to make new human connections. They reached out for other survivors who instinctively understood the trauma and the loss they had experienced without having to discuss it too much.
People got married. They would take a hut and divide it into 10 tiny rooms for 10 couples. The desire for life overcame everything. After such destruction, to build a new life, to get married, to bring children into the world. In the ability to forget lay the ability to create a new life.
There was an astonishing number of marriages in the DP camps, sometimes as many as 6 every day. And after the marriages came children. In fact, the survivors' birth rate was higher than anywhere else in the world. In the Bergen-Belsen camp alone, 555 babies were born in 1946, and by 1948, the camp was celebrating the birth of the 1,000th baby. All of these things were manifestations of the survivors' drive to live, and not only to live, but also to create new life. They were building a future. After spending needed time in the DP camps, where the survivors could recuperate, reestablish their connections, and regain their footing, they moved on to places where they could put down roots and settle permanently. Survivors immigrated to all parts of the world, with the majority of them reaching and settling in the United States and in Israel. Wherever they went, they contributed to the societies in which they settled. For Jewish survivors, the end of the war was merely the beginning of a difficult journey. They needed to adapt to living with the scars of loss and the memories that they would continue to carry with them. Though some survivors never recovered from the trauma of the Holocaust, most of them managed to build a new life.
On the night of November 11, 1940, 21 biplanes from Royal Navy aircraft carrier launched a surprise attack on the Italian fleet anchored in the port of Taranto. The Italian ships were protected by anti-torpedo nets and surrounded by barrage balloons and anti-aircraft defenses. They thought they were immune to an air attack. However, in less than 2 hours, the Swordfish torpedo bombers struck 3 battleships and several cruisers and severely damaged the port installation. The Royal Navy gained effective control of the Mediterranean, losing just 2 aircraft and 4 crewmen. It was the first time carrier-borne aircraft had been used in an attack on heavily defended warships. The raid not only revolutionized naval warfare, it also changed the course of history. Other navies took a keen interest in the Royal Navy's use of an aircraft carrier to launch an attack at long range, particularly the Japanese Imperial Fleet. Just over a year later, the Japanese would use the aircraft carrier to launch an assault on the American fleet in Pearl Harbor.
This is a story of the sea, on which Britain, through the ages, has depended for her security and for the lifeblood of her existence commerce. We acknowledge the honors due to all our mercantile marines in all the 7 seas. But of the ships that sail the waters of the globe, proudest are those which thrive in sea lanes of the North Atlantic, bridging the ocean waves that divide the Western Hemisphere. And foremost among these floating bridges are the mighty Queen Elizabeth and her sister ships in Queen Mary, monumental symbols of Britain's shipbuilding skills and exploits, her seafaring leadership. Here in the Queen Elizabeth, as in the Queen Mary too, nothing has been spared that would make the British transatlantic service swift and efficient. There isn't one of us who doesn't know these seafaring fleets by name, though there are plenty of us who think not. But in the ship's still, nothing, not even the stage boy's manicure, is taken for granted. And minutest details must be as perfect as the stand is suggested. And as ocean travelers pass their carefree days, what do they know of the history that these great decks have seen and made?
Stop it, Sergeant. Men of the Indian Army are starting another day. Yes, they have their daily dozen in India too, but many more than a dozen dishes. There are no more versatile performers than Indian Army cooks, for every caste and creed is catered for. You can get some idea of the men's fine physique at rifle drill, and do they jump to it? Rapid fire. Now the ack-ack gun. The men learn to go into action in a flash. Indian Army soldiers are deadly with a machine gun. They're keen to handle it, and they act with great precision. Nice shooting this, and now see how smartly the crews change over. In bayonet practice, the target is a wire loop. A The man who holds it has certainly got to be a live wire. The signalers are another example of alertness and efficiency, and flagging is only one of the many methods they employ. Here's the heliograph and the shutter. When off duty, the contented Indian fighting man spends some of his time footing it to the strange rhythms of his ancient country. The pen may be mightier than the sword, but it isn't much use in a war dance. The Guard presents arms as the colours are escorted on parade. Men of India, comrades across the seas, we salute you.